Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to talk about transfer paper. So here I have some iron oxide transfer paper, and basically it's a piece of newsprint with some loose iron oxide pigment on one side. You've probably seen it in a lot of my videos. It's the primary way that I transfer my image onto my matrix. And basically transfer paper is a piece of paper that you can put in between your sketch and your matrix, pigment side down, and then applying pressure to the back of it, it will transfer that loose pigment over to the matrix. And iron oxide transfer paper has a few key benefits over your standard, say, graphite transfer paper or drawing straight onto the block. For one, the red color has a lot of contrast, so you can see it on these white stone litho surfaces or gray linoleum or even, black stained surfaces for wood carving. And in the case of lithography, it'll help differentiate between your sketch and the lines that you've drawn with your litho pencils. And the iron oxide transfer will not interfere with any of the chemistry that you might do for lithography, although it will wash away once you do your first etches. And lastly, another key benefit is that red iron oxide pigment is pretty easy to obtain and is relatively cheap compared to most other pigments. But you could really use any other pigment that you wanted to for this transfer process. So, what do you need to get started? Firstly, you'll probably want a respirator. Anytime you're handling loose pigment, you probably want to wear one of these so you don't breathe any particles. You'll want a glass slab, or you could use a paper plate, just something to help contain the mess. And of course, you'll want your pigment. And so technically I'm using Indian red, which is mostly iron oxide comprised and a little bit of clay. But again, you could use any color pigment if you wanted to. And of course, you'll need your newsprint that you're going to turn into this transfer paper. These are what you're going to need, bare minimum at least. Some other things that are nice to have are some temporary solvents, like this mineral spirits or even isopropyl alcohol if you have it. Disposable gloves come in very handy since this is a very messy process. And of course, some paper towels to help you spread this onto your newsprint. So go ahead and take out some of your pigment to work with. And when working with pigments, usually you want to be very careful and not to agitate it too much because you don't want those particles to go in the air. You just want to kind of work with it kind of slowly. And truthfully, this process is about as simple as just taking a rag and just rubbing it across the surface of your paper. And you're pretty much done. This will work as transfer paper, although it does take a lot of back and forth to kind of get the whole paper saturated. But let's go ahead and talk about why you might want to use some solvents in this process. Firstly, the isopropyl alcohol, because most people will have this around your house. It dries fast, and unlike water, it won't really warp your paper very badly. If you used water, your paper would get very crinkly and it would take a long time to dry. Not that it wouldn't work. And as you can see here, it's applying much easier. With the dry pigment, I just had to scrub it back and forth with a lot of force. But here, with little effort, I can just kind of color in this whole sheet of paper. No big deal. And once you've done filling out the whole sheet of paper, it'll probably be dry and ready to use in about a minute or two. Lastly, the mineral spirits, and you would apply it in the same way that you applied the alcohol. Just get a little bit onto your rag, and then just kind of wipe up a little bit of the pigment in a slurry, and then spread it out onto your paper. And the advantage of the mineral spirits is that it dries a little bit slower than the alcohol, but it still doesn't warp your paper as badly as water would. And so it's a lot easier to spread this out onto the paper because it's not drying out on your towel as fast. The disadvantage being that once you're done, you probably have to wait about like 10 minutes or so after you've done applying it for it to dry. Otherwise, you might get some oils onto whatever your matrix is. But is there any difference in quality between the three different methods? Well, not really. See here, I'll try it onto three different surfaces, the no solvent, the alcohol, and the mineral spirits. And they all kind of produce the same quality of line. They all read kind of equally as well. The only difference in my experience is that if you make it with no solvent, your transfer paper will kind of start to fade over time. It has less and less pigment to kind of transfer on over. But because it's so easy to make, I mean, there's no real reason to be afraid of that. And so, make it any which way your heart desires. One final thing, because the iron oxide paper is just loose pigment transferring over, it can be kind of relatively easily wiped off, which could be good or bad depending on what you want. But if you want it to last, throughout multiple cleanings and printings, you can go ahead and seal it with some clear fixative, like this one I've got right here. Just spray some workable fixative, let it dry for a bit, and then it's almost impossible to get rid of, unless you use, some heavy solvents. Happy printing. I'll see you later.